It all started when I was working at my extremely boring job. I am an accountant, and day after day I would go to the office and punch numbers for our clients, go home to an empty house, go to bed, get up the next morning, and repeat. I needed something in my life I could be proud of, and something more productive, and something I could say I have accomplished on my own. My hobby was hiking and being outdoors. I was living in a big city, so the only places to take walks were in the city parks. I'm not downing the parks because they are beautiful. However, I wanted a change of pace in my life. I didn't necessarily want to move to the country, but I wanted to see what was out there instead of merely high-rise buildings and thousands of people. My coworker, Kimberly, and her husband took their vacations in the mountains, spending time rock climbing. Being avid climbers, Kim would return from vacations looking refreshed and happy. The couple would go to other countries and tackle the towering mountains, and as she would say, we had the time of our lives. I wanted that. I needed that. All my vacations consisted of was taking time away from work with no goals or plans in mind. I stayed at home and watched movies for 2 to 3 weeks. It was boring and uneventful, and I returned to work feeling the same as if I had not even taken a vacation. I needed a change in my life before I succumbed to a deep depression. One morning before heading into work, I stopped into the little cafe that was located on the corner. I grabbed a cup of coffee, a donut, and purchased a newspaper to catch up on the local news. That morning, the cafe was extremely crowded. Luckily, I had found a small round table with 2 chairs after scanning the packed dining area for a moment. I didn't have anyone to join me, but as far as I could tell, it was the last empty table in the place, as more people were pouring through the door. I quickly rushed to claim it, placed my coffee and donut on the table, and pulled the chair out to sit. After taking a sip of my freshly brewed coffee, I opened the newspaper and began scanning through the articles. I was minding my own business and reading an article in the newspaper when I overheard the conversation between 2 men at the table next to me. I tried not to eavesdrop. However, the 2 young men were within hearing distance. They were about my age, late 20s or close, and judging by their appearance, they seemed to be very athletic. I must have been unknowingly staring at them because one turned and looked at me. When we made eye contact, I nodded, and he returned a polite nod. I brought my newspaper back up to my face, and they resumed their conversation. I was skimming over the articles, not reading one word, because I was intrigued by the subject matter. They were discussing the Appalachian Trail. One of the men was telling the other about his experience walking the entirety of the Appalachian Trail and telling him about the experiences he encountered. It was very intriguing, and I wanted to hear the rest of the story, but time was getting away from me, and I had to hurry to work. At work, between clients and punching numbers, all I could think about was the conversation earlier about the trail. I needed to know more information about it. I could hardly wait until I got off work so I could head to the library. After a long day at work, I made a beeline to the library. I searched high and low for anything I could find about the Appalachian Trail. Finally, I found a book called Hiking the Appalachian Trail, Memoir, and a National Geographic magazine with an article about the mountainous trail. I sat down at a table to flip through the magazine and found the article. It was about 10 pages long, and I devoured every word that was written on every page, but it wasn't enough information to quench my thirst. I spent a couple of hours in the library before realizing how hungry I was. I decided I would get some food and finish reading the book at home. I took the memoir book up to the counter and checked it out. When I arrived at my apartment with my takeout Chinese food and my borrowed book, I threw my work clothes off, dressed in my night clothes, and began eating as I read my book. Before I knew it, I was lost in the book, and in my mind, I was walking on the Appalachian Trail alongside the author. By the time I had finished reading, I knew that I had to go to Springer Mountain and experience a hiking adventure as the author had. I was excited and ready to pack my bags and head that way. But I had one problem. In the book, the author noted that it took him 7 months to complete the trail. 7 months. There was no way on God's green earth that my boss would let me take 7 months off from work to go trekking in the woods. I was getting obsessed with the trail, and I thought I had no way of being able to go on the trip. As days, weeks, and months went by, I was becoming more and more obsessed with the trail. I was reading everything I could find about it and saving money for the adventure. I knew I would eventually go, and I hoped it was sooner rather than later. But of course, my job held me back from experiencing my newly discovered dream. One day, I had had enough stress, and the lack of respect was at its peak from my boss, so I had to quit. I was a certified accountant and very good at my job. I knew that I could find any other job anywhere I chose. I was out. With no job and nothing to hold me back, I was ready to go hiking and explore the wilderness. I bought all the necessities I thought I would need and nervously jumped on a bus and headed to Springer Mountain. My backpack straps sat heavily on my shoulders as I stared at the sign that said, Appalachian Trail Approach, Springer Mountain, Georgia, 8.5 miles, to Mount. Katahdin, Maine 2,108.5 miles, and I studied the archway that I was about to walk under to begin my long journey. Did I know what I was getting into? The answer to that was a resounding no. However, I was there, and it was too late to turn back, so onward I went. Little did I know, this would be the experience of a lifetime. It was rough going at first. When I would count the state lines and the blisters that formed on my feet that I had passed, I thought, hey, I got this. I would make it a goal to walk to the next state line. It's amazing how my life has changed by walking in the woods. Beforehand, I would stress about numbers, clients, and getting to work on time. Now, all I had to worry about was walking and getting enough food, and what beautiful place the trail would lead me next. But for the first time in my adult years, I was happy. Everything was going smoothly until I hit the Tennessee-Virginia state line. Tennessee is a beautiful state, but I was ready to tackle Virginia. As soon as I breezed past the state line and was making valuable time in Virginia, walking along the trail, things began to change. For the first time in my life, and especially on this trip, I had an overwhelming feeling of being watched. The feeling was so strong that I had to stop at this point and look around. I knew that there were more people on the trail, but I also knew that I hadn't seen anyone in a while. I also had read about the bears in these woods. Even though I wanted to see one from afar, I didn't want to stumble upon one, and for it tear me from limb to limb. While I was stopped, I ate a snack and checked my map, and located a small town nearby which would be a suitable place to restock my provisions and spend the night at a hotel. It was getting late in the evening, and I knew that to make it to the small town before dark, I had to hustle. I put my map away and took a couple of steps, when I suddenly heard someone or something to the right of me walking in the woods, which halted me in my tracks, but it stopped. I proceeded to walk again, and I noticed with every step I took, I heard the same footsteps in the woods walking alongside of me. I continued to have an eerie feeling of being watched, and I continued to hear someone walking in the woods just out of eyesight from me. Was someone trying to mess with me? Why are they not walking on the path, but in the woods? What was going on? As I quickened my pace, feeling uneasy and wanting to get into town as soon as possible, I could still hear someone walking in the woods, rustling the leaves and breaking limbs and twigs as we went along, when, suddenly, the most powerful and pungent odor consumed me so violently. I had to stop, and I vomited up the snack that I just ate. That's when I became extremely frightened. My heart started to beat faster as I looked around to see what was close to me. I kept my hand over my mouth and nose as I started power walking, while I kept watching the woods where I heard the footsteps that still followed me. What worried me the most was that daylight was fading, and I knew I was nowhere near the small town in safety. I had flashlights and a headlamp, but I didn't want to be walking in the dark with something or someone following after me in the woods. I was near panic. After walking at a fast pace for so long, my legs started to get weak, I reached for my bear spray that I kept dangling on my backpack, and somehow that made me feel safer. Even though I didn't think whatever it was following me was a bear or a mountain lion, which sounded like someone walking bipedally, I knew that if I had to use it, it would be harsh on anything. I came upon a creek that crossed the path, and the big hill I had to climb on the other side, beyond the creek. My legs and feet hurt so bad that I was forced to stop for a rest. I had not heard any footsteps for a while, and I thought maybe I was safe enough to take a short break. I sat down on a fallen tree to catch my breath. I reached down to retie the loose laces on my boot. When I looked back up, my heart fell to my stomach, and my blood ran cold. Standing in the middle of the path from where I had just come, and about 40 feet away from me, was a massive bipedal creature staring at me. The creature from head to toe was covered in dark brown hair, with massive arms, long hair that hung down its forearms, and its hands reached down to its knees. The head was coned, and the face was ape-like, with sunken eyes that pierced through me and went into my soul. I was frozen in shock. I don't know how long we stared at each other, but when the Bigfoot-like creature growled and showed its massive teeth, my whole body started to shake, and I must have blacked out. The next thing I remembered was waking up to other hikers surrounding me and asking if I was all right. I asked one of the hikers, as they were helping me to my feet, what the time and day were. I was again terrified when they told me I must have spent the night at that spot by the creek. I noticed I wasn't hurt and started thinking that maybe I had just dreamt of the creature because I was exhausted. One thing that I did take note of was that my backpack was missing. It contained my tent, money, water bottles, and most importantly, my food. When we started toward the creek in the direction of the small town, I could not help but think that another hiker had taken my backpack, as I was in a vulnerable state, passed out, and stole everything I had. One of the hikers asked if I was thirsty. He had an extra water bottle with a filter that I could use. I was so grateful for that hiker. I was extremely parched. I had previously considered drinking the creek water. Thankfully, that kind hiker saved me from possibly gulping the unfiltered water and parasites, which could have caused much pain and diarrhea in the future. When the hiker bent down to fill the bottle with water, he stopped midway and stared at something in the mud. "Check this out," he said as the other hikers and I surrounded him, looking where he was pointing. It was a huge footprint. As we looked around the creek bank, we noticed more footprints that walked in a straight line, following the creek. It was then that I realized that I did not dream of the creature. I saw it. "They don't call this area Bigfoot territory for nothing," chimed in another hiker. That was it for me. I was ready to go home to the big city and get out of the woods. I knew that being in the big city, all I had to worry about was being mugged or shot. No big deal, right? However, I had to worry about being torn to shreds by a Bigfoot. I made the very simple and easy decision that I would take my chances in the big city. I could hardly wait to get back home. I made it back to the big city. I had called my old boss and begged for my job back. Surprisingly, he liked me enough to give me another chance at the accounting firm. I also told myself that I would never complain about how boring my work or life was in the city. From then on, I stepped out of my apartment every morning and headed into work with a smile on my face. As luck would have it, I met a beautiful city girl who filled my heart with pride and replaced the loneliness in my life.